at praise and worship. And I know that the Lord is pressing him to, as I say, Brother David, write those things down, because those are things that we all need to know. And just God can speak to him about anything. And I just think that's awesomely cool. So Brother David's going to come and share with us about the Father, I think.
I just want to share something. God, he's always showing me something. Mainly he's been showing me, and I just don't ask him what it is. And the other night I was sleeping real deep. And, I woke up and, it was something that he was showing me. And I said, I want to know what this is. And what I seen, I'm going to show you what I seen. I seen a house, and it was just a radiant, just a light just beaming off of it. And I seen these dark things kind of coming down at it. And I asked him, what was it, what I need to know what it is. And I asked him, he said it was like, he showed me like a father was in a house, and he's praying, and he's keeping his house protected. And he's like these demons or dark things coming down, they're always trying to attack it. But when they got to that house, they could only come so far because the light was so bright, and they were just beaming off of it. And he showed me that a father is the covering, for that home. And I thought, yeah, I see what you're saying, and they need to stand for his family. And I see why, how the enemy attacks the father so much, because he's got a lot of responsibility, the man. And he showed me like I'm in the cars. That's the only thing. Sometimes I can explain things. He showed me like a assembly line. And his car, as it starts out, it's just a chassis. But as it comes down, everybody adds a part to it. You got your cars, your tires, your wheel, engine. And once it gets through the end of that line, it's a complete car. And, and it's got a duty to do. And when it gets out on the journey of life, there are things that happen to it. I don't care how new it is or how pretty it is, there's going to be wear and tear on it. And he showed me that's how a father is. When he gets down, he raises a family and his kids and all of that. And he gets down there, he get bumps in it. He could have a flat tire or anything. And what he showed me was like the man in the church. Like I always look up my pastor, like he said this morning, I didn't have, like he said, I had a father, I had a good father, I had a good home, but I didn't have a spiritual father. But Pastor Don, he's my spiritual father. Like he said, Brother Miller was to him, that's where he was to me. And there's so other many men in here that added parts of my life as I go down the road, shiny and new, but, Christian. But as I went down that line, sometimes you get a flat, and there's somebody in the church, a man that'll come and give me a word, and just, my tires are filled again. And I get down that road again, and sometimes my tank gets low. And it's another man that'll add fuel to it. Sometimes my windshield will get dirty, and, with bugs, and there's mans that come down there clean my windshield, like see out of my eyes again. And as I go down that journey, there's so many mans that added to my life, and I thank them for that. I look up to Dean. He's a father to me. And I look at, Pastor Don, like I said, and all the other mans, like even those ones that got on before that taught me so many things, even like Earl, how many things he done taught me, that spiritual man in my life. Even like Danny Brownfield, he put something in my life. And Sandy's father, Tom, he put so much in my life. And those things that I never will forget, all those men that went on, even Paul, blazed the trail. He was a spiritual man in my life. And I look back and I see even when I had my last surgery, I was laying up in there, I said, man, I've been cut from top to bottom. It's like a car had to get dings, but I always get fixed, repaired, because somebody come along and give me a word of encouragement, and I just keep going down that road, because there are bumps in the road and that and this and that. But God always brings somebody across my path to keep even like when my mind gets kind of weary, somebody come along and speak a word to me, and I get a good tune-up, because a car gets kind of sluggish. Sometimes you got to get a tune-up. And they put something in my mind, and I'm just good to go for another while, And then, like I said, life's a journey, and we're on it to win, and we're going to win it. But when I get on the highway, I want to get where I'm going. And in this journey of life, I'm going to get where I'm going. And I look at all these young men here that's going to be grown men one of these days, and I want to add something to their life. And I know one of these days they're going to grow up, and they're going to add somebody else's life, man's. And that's what I want to see, the man's, be man's, grow up in the church and be what they can be. Because I don't want to see, like I really think like a lot of mans that gets out there, and they really don't know how to be a man. And a lot of them end up in the prisons. I mean, because they don't know how to obey authority, and they end up down that road. But a lot of them will, maybe that's where they need to be, and they get to hear the word there. But I just thank God that I didn't get that far. I got here while I had a spiritual father lead me the right way, and I appreciate it. I do. I thank you.
This week, as I was pondering about today and about the service and about those things, and I began to think about the leadership that the men have in the church and the call of God that's on their life and what we've seen. And I begin to say, Lord, help us to teach and train the young men that we have here now to be servants in the house of God. I got my list down, and I may have missed someone, so if you had this, don't get offended at me, okay? But I got my list down, and I know Brother Dean did, but and I was looking for men that had a really godly father, because I just thought, I'd like to hear from some men who had a really godly father and see what that father had taught to them and let them share with you, about some of the things that and so I got our church list down, and I began to go down the list, and I was amazed how, and I thought, Lord, if we've lost that many, from this generation to this generation, and now we see what's happened to the home, how will we ever, because I could not find hardly anyone at all. Like I said, I know Brother Dean did, and I may have overlooked it, I may not know your father, but for the fathers that I knew and for the people that I knew and knew the story of, I could not find those spiritual people in the home like that Pastor had said this morning. I thought that was such a good way he put it. His dad was the most awesome man that you've ever met. He was an awesome dad. And not to have been a spiritual man, he had it together more than most people that you would ever know. But where are those spiritual fathers that, we as people in the body, being men, it becomes your responsibility to teach and train up your children, and also to teach and train up the children that are here. Pastor usually always says that when we do dedications, it's this body's responsibility, to teach and to train. And so I just said, Lord, it made me a little, I was just taken back a little bit when I begin to look and I begin to think about the number of people that we did not have that many people attending that had a strong spiritual leadership in the home. Now, I know that some of you are strong leadership. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying I begin to look for, those. And so as I was just thinking about then in 2 Kings, 17th chapter, and I think it's about the 41st verse, said, so these nations vainly feared the Lord, and also served their graven images, as did their children and their children's children, and their fathers did, as their fathers did, so did they do to this day. And I say, Lord, help us in our lives as mothers and fathers to be able to set examples, that because you don't understand that what you're sowing into your children, they are also going to follow that path. And I know that you can do everything right and still have a child that can go wayward because they make those choices. But so much of the time, they pattern their self after what they see. And so I just, and the one thing that we do know, as in Proverbs 22:6, it says, if you train up the child in the way it's supposed to go, when it's old, it won't depart from it. Now, I cannot tell you what old is, but I do know that old shall surely come, And so that becomes our responsibility as I begin to see that in the realm of the spirit, that if you teach your whatever you teach your children to worship, whatever you teach your children to put first in their life, that's that counts really big for them, and they may not even do it, but they will never be able to get away from what you've put inside of them. And so many times as they mature, then even if they wander off a little, they'll come back to the heritage. They'll come back to the God of the family, of the heritage. Isn't that great and wonderful? And so we know that nothing's in vain. And so the word and the time that you spend and the hours that you put in praying, and I'm just so focused at this point. I feel like at this time it's such a strong thing for me to get into us, that is our responsibility. Generations to come, we are to be speaking to generations that we will not see. We are to be speaking, and those things, and you say, and those are the kind of things that are hard, because if you can see the evidence right now, it's like it's a reward for you. But whenever, God is calling us to pray for generations, and those are things that we may never see in this life. We may never see. And so those are the harder things that we have to begin to take serious, that we have to begin to birth those things out when we cannot see that. But that's what God is calling us, and as fathers, and I just say, Lord, thank you for the men in our church that will be faithful, and that will serve God, and that will serve the body of Christ. And many times we don't see, because the men are not as visual, even as the women, we don't see many times what they're doing and the work that they're doing and the things that they're doing to keep the building going and those kind of things. And so today, as I just begin to just look at that in the Word, I just begin to say, Lord, help us at this time of our life. That it is very important what you do with your life, the words that you speak to your children, the words that you speak to your family. They're very, very important. In Psalms, nope, got the wrong one. Let's go to Proverbs. (23) 22, it says, hearken to your father who begot you, and despise not your mother when she's old. Buy the truth and sell it not. Not only that, but also get discernment and judgment, instruction and understanding. And as he begins to say to us that you must hearken, that we must hearken to the word that we hear. And as this body, we must hearken to the word that our spiritual father sets out for us, as well as a natural father, that it becomes our responsibility to hearken to the word of God that he's preaching to us, that he's teaching to us, to line our lives up with that, because that's what God is saying to us. And we know that God uses people, and so as he begins to tell us that to begin to line ourselves up with that, and hearken to that, and because it's so important that we don't just hear but not hear. Many people come and they hear the word of the Lord, but they don't hear the word of the Lord, and they leave. And they take no accountability to take the word that they have and put it to work in their life. So as fathers, as mothers, as people in this local body, as Pastor begins to break the word of life to us, as he begins to teach us through the word, then it becomes your responsibility to take that word that he's taught us and to teach us and to teach your children. And as spiritual fathers in this church, it becomes our responsibility to pass the word on. As we study back in Exodus, whenever he was talking to them, and they had crossed the Red Sea, and what he continually told them is, you've got to talk about it. You got to talk about the laws. You got to talk about the word. You've got to set your children down. You got to tell your children. The most important thing is that you keep it before your children, because there is a lot of other voices speaking to us, but it becomes our responsibility to teach our children and to teach them to be obedient, even to what Pastor is teaching us. And that's what I always try to tell people. you know, even about our services and those kind of things. You know, yes, pastors and the elders, they've set the times of the services, but pastor being the person who God has chosen to lead, then when it's like a father in your home, when your dad says we're going to eat at 5:00 and you say, can I go over here? How many of you ever asked, you know, maybe your mom or can I go over here and do this? And he said, you can go for 30 minutes, but you be back here at 5:00 because your dad will be here and we're going to be eating. And your dad said, this is the time we're going to, anybody's parents ever say, you can go, but you got to be back because dad says. And I think sometimes, you know, we don't understand that spiritual food that we need. It becomes our responsibility to be obedient to that. And that was one of the things, the reason that they wandered around in the wilderness for so long, because they would not be obedient to what they were being told. They would not be obedient to the word of what they were being taught. So I just thank God for godly men, and I thank God for a body of Christ where we can hear the word, and then we can take it on to our children, and not to just our children, but to we have to get into our children enough that they can get it into their children, that they can get it into their children. But when that word gets down inside of you, you take it everywhere with you. I said you take it everywhere with you, because every answer that you give someone, whether it's in the marketplace, whether it's to your neighbor or whatever, you base on the word of the Lord that we've been taught and that we've been fed. And so it's very, very important for us to not just take that word and take it lightly, but to keep that word strong and in our hearts and in our minds. And many of us have had, I also, like Pastor, I had a wonderful father, but he was not a spiritual man. And there was a few times in our life whenever he, you know, started going to church for a little while, and then he had, you know, not. And then as he got older, he only came when it was time to eat. And if we'd do food, he'd come. And so that was, you know, and I just thought, well, they're going to be the marriage supper of the Lamb, so he ought to be right at home in heaven, you know. But you know, but he wasn't a spiritually strong man. He was a good dad. We had a good home, but he wasn't a spiritually strong man. But I want you all to be that kind of person. I want you to be that for your homes. I want you to teach your children, teach your sons and your daughters, you know, that's so very, very important.